You've been living in patterns, patterns you didn't choose, patterns you inherited, patterns that repeat themselves like clockwork. Maybe it's the cycle of fear, the cycle of doubt, the cycle of procrastination. Maybe it's the cycle of doing just enough to survive, but never enough to thrive. And every time you say, tomorrow, I'll change, tomorrow shows up looking exactly like yesterday. But listen to me, cycles are not chains forged in steel. They are choices repeated, reinforced, rehearsed. And the second you truly decide to stop feeding that cycle, the second you declare enough is enough, you begin to break it. Do you know what keeps people stuck? It's not their circumstances. It's not their lack of resources. It's their belief that the cycle is permanent, that the story they've lived is the story they must continue to leave. But the truth, the story can be rewritten the moment you take back the pen. You break the cycle when you interrupt your patterns. You break the cycle when you refuse to settle. You break the cycle when you stop negotiating with your excuses and start demanding more from yourself. Think about it. Every breakthrough in history happened because someone stood up and said, this ends with me. Slavery ended because someone said, this ends with me. Injustice was challenged because someone said, this ends with me. And right now in your life, the pain, the doubt, the fear, it ends when you rise and say, this ends with me. Don't underestimate the power of that decision. One decision can redirect your entire destiny. One moment of courage can rewrite generations. One act of defiance against the old cycle can create a new cycle of strength, power, and freedom. So ask yourself right now, what cycle has held you captive? Is it the cycle of self-sabotage, the cycle of settling for less, the cycle of living in survival mode? Whatever it is, you have the authority to shatter it today. Because breaking the cycle isn't about waiting for the perfect conditions. It's about creating the conditions. It's about saying, even if I'm scared, I move. Even if I fail, I rise. Even if the world doubts me, I believe. So here's my challenge to you. No more rehearsing the old story. No more replaying the old patterns. No more settling for the cycle that has drained your energy and stolen your potential. Stand tall, breathe deep, and declare it with certainty. This ends with me. A new cycle begins today. Cycles are patterns, not prisons. Too many people live their entire lives believing that because something has always been a certain way, it will always remain that way. They confuse repetition with permanence. They mistake what is familiar for what is unchangeable. But the truth is, every cycle that controls your life, every loop of behavior, every repetitive thought, every destructive habit is not made of steel. It is made of repetition. It is not a life sentence. It is a habit you can break. The human brain is built for patterns. It loves routine. It wants to conserve energy by repeating what it already knows. That is why so many people live inside cycles of fear, cycles of limitation, cycles of doubt, cycles of procrastination, cycles of anger, cycles of settling for less than they deserve. They wake up, they go through the same motions, they think the same thoughts, they experience the same emotions, and then they wonder why nothing changes. The answer is simple: nothing changes because they have not changed the cycle. What you repeat becomes what you believe. What you believe becomes what you expect. And what you expect becomes what you experience. That is how cycles become cages. But the cage is not locked. It only feels locked because you've been rehearsing the same script for so long that you've forgotten you can throw it out. You can decide right now that the pattern ends. You can decide right now that you are no longer a prisoner of repetition. You can decide that you will create a new cycle, one that empowers you instead of one that enslaves you. Think of it this way. A cycle is like a track that your mind has worn into the ground. The more you walk it, the deeper it gets. And every day you repeat the same actions, the same thoughts, the same excuses, the groove gets deeper until it feels impossible to climb out. But the truth is, you can stop walking that track and start walking a new one. At first, it will feel uncomfortable. It will feel unnatural. It will feel like you are carving a path through thick brush with your bare hands. But if you stay consistent, the new path becomes clear, the old path starts to fade, and before you know it, the new cycle has replaced the old. The reason so many people stay stuck in cycles is because they confuse pain with permanence. They experience struggle and assume struggle is who they are. They fail once and assume they are failures. They procrastinate today and assume they are lazy forever. They get rejected and assume they are unworthy. That is how patterns get reinforced. The story repeats until it becomes an identity. But your identity is not your past. Your identity is the choices you make in this moment. You can choose to break the story. You can choose to break the repetition. You can choose to break the cycle. Understand this: cycles thrive in silence. The more you ignore them, the more they control you. The more you avoid confronting them, the more they wrap themselves around your life like vines around a tree. But the moment you call them out, the moment you shine a light on them, the moment you say, This is not me. This is a pattern I've been repeating. You begin to take back your power. The cycle loses its grip because it can no longer hide. You've exposed it. And once you've exposed it, you can replace it. Patterns are powerful, but they are not unbreakable. If you can create a destructive pattern, you can create an empowering one. If you can wire your brain to expect failure, you can rewire it to expect success. If you can rehearse excuses, you can rehearse discipline. If you can live in cycles of fear, you can build cycles of courage. The process is the same. Repetition creates the cycle, so new repetition creates a new cycle. The only question is, which cycle are you willing to feed? Breaking a cycle does not require perfection. It requires a decision. It requires that moment when you say, I will not keep doing this. I will not keep living this story. I will not keep repeating what does not serve me. That moment of decision has more power than years of habit, because one moment of absolute certainty can destroy the illusion of permanence. And when you destroy the illusion, you step into truth. And the truth is you are free. Look around your life. Every cycle that keeps you stuck is not a life sentence. It's a habit. The cycle of staying in toxic relationships, the cycle of playing small, the cycle of ignoring your health, the cycle of numbing your potential with distractions, the cycle of never demanding more from yourself. All of them are patterns. And if they are patterns, they can be broken. And if they can be broken, they no longer own you. The only way they survive is if you feed them with repetition. You can choose differently. You can think differently. You can act differently. And the second you do, you begin to carve a new track, a new groove, a new pattern. Imagine what happens when instead of repeating fear, you repeat courage. Instead of repeating doubt, you repeat belief. Instead of repeating excuses, you repeat action. Instead of repeating pain, you repeat gratitude. Those repetitions become your new cycle. And that cycle becomes your new reality. The most dangerous lie you can believe is that the way things have been is the way they will always be. That is the lie that keeps people small. That is the lie that keeps people stuck. That is the lie that keeps people inside invisible prisons. But remember, this cycles are patterns, not prisons. They cannot hold you unless you keep walking in circles. They cannot trap you unless you keep feeding them. They cannot define you unless you let them. So the choice is yours. You can keep living the old cycle. You can keep repeating what has always been. You can keep rehearsing the same script and calling it your life. Or you can stop. You can break the pattern. You can take the pen back and write a new script. You can carve a new path. You can create a new cycle. And once you do, you will realize you were never a prisoner. You were always the one holding the key. The story you've lived is not the story you must continue to live. Every single one of us carries a story about who we are, where we came from, what we've been through, what we're capable of, and what we're not. That story shapes the way we think, the way we act, the way we see the world. It becomes the lens we look through, the filter we interpret everything with. But here's the truth. Your story is not set in stone. Your story is not fixed. Your story is not your destiny. Your story is a choice. You can keep living the one that limits you, or you can write a new one that liberates you. Too many people walk around imprisoned by an old story. Maybe it's the story of their childhood. Maybe it's the story of their failures. Maybe it's the story of what someone else told them they could or couldn't be. They carry that story into every decision, every relationship, every opportunity, and then they wonder why life keeps repeating itself. Life repeats itself because the story repeats itself. If your story is, I'm not enough, you'll find ways to confirm it. If your story is, I always fail, you'll sabotage success before it even arrives. If your story is, nothing ever changes, you'll stop trying before you give yourself a chance to win. But if you shift the story, if you tell yourself a new one, everything begins to change. Think about it. The greatest breakthroughs in history happened because someone refused to keep living the old story. If the story was, this is impossible, someone came along and said, watch me. If the story was, this is the way it's always been, someone came along and said, then it's time for something new. You can be that someone in your own life. You can be the one who says, the story ends here. I'm writing a new one, because the story you've lived up until now has only been a draft. It is not the final version. It is not the whole book. It is just the introduction. And you hold the pen for every chapter that follows. When people feel stuck, it's not because they lack the ability to move forward. It's because they keep rehearsing the same story. They tell it to themselves so often that it becomes their reality. They tell it to others so often that it becomes their identity. And once it's an identity, they defend it, they protect it, even when it hurts them. But the moment you stop defending the old story, you create space for a new one. The moment you stop identifying with limitation, you create room for possibility. The moment you stop clinging to who you were, you create freedom to become who you can be The power of your story is not in what has already happened, but in what you decide it means. You can take the same past, the same struggles, the same failures, and tell two completely different stories. One story says, this broke me. Another says, this built me. One says, I'm cursed. Another says, I'm chosen. One says, I've wasted my time. Another says, everything prepared me for this moment. The facts don't change, but the meaning does. And the meaning you choose determines the future you create. People often think that because they've lived a certain way for years, they're destined to live that way forever. They say things like, that's just who I am. But no, that's who you were. That's who you chose to be yesterday. That's the story you accepted. But you don't have to accept it anymore. You can flip the script. You can reinvent yourself. You can create a story that empowers you, that inspires you, that makes you come alive. Because the story you've lived is not the story you must continue to live. You may have been told you weren't smart enough, talented enough, worthy enough. That was someone else's story. Don't carry it as your own. You may have failed over and over and decided that failure is a story. It's not. Failure is a chapter, not the book. You may have struggled. You may have suffered. You may have fallen short. But those are scenes, not the entire movie. The movie can take a turn right now if you decide to rewrite the script. It doesn't matter how many years you've lived inside the old story. The moment you decide to tell a new one, everything shifts. The moment you declare, this is not who I am anymore, this is not my story anymore, I choose differently, you break the cycle. You interrupt the pattern. You flip the narrative, and the energy that used to hold you back begins to push you forward. Because stories are powerful, they shape beliefs. Beliefs shape actions. Actions shape results. Change the story, and you change everything that follows. But here's what you must understand. Writing a new story requires courage. It requires courage because the old story is comfortable, even if it's painful. It's familiar. It feels safe because you know it so well. The new story feels uncertain. It feels risky. It feels like stepping into the unknown. And that is exactly why most people never write it. They prefer the comfort of a painful story over the risk of a liberating one. But if you're willing to step into that uncertainty, if you're willing to risk rewriting your life, you will discover a freedom you never imagined. Ask yourself right now, what is the story I've been telling myself? What story have I used as an excuse? What story have I allowed to define me? And then ask, is it true? Is it serving me? Is it the story I want to keep living? If the answer is no, then you know what you must do. Take the pen back. Stop letting your past write your future. Stop letting someone else's opinion write your destiny. Stop letting fear write your decisions. Write a story that aligns with the person you know you were born to be. When you shift the story, everything else follows. Relationships shift. Opportunities shift. Energy shifts. When you change the story from can't to I will, doors open that you never saw before. When you change the story from I'm broken to I'm unbreakable, strength rises inside you that you never tapped into. When you change the story from it's too late to this is just the beginning, you ignite hope, passion, and purpose. And all of it starts with the simple but powerful truth. The story you've lived is not the story you must continue to live. Every breakthrough begins with one decision. This ends with me. Life does not change because of luck, chance, or the passage of time. Life changes because you draw a line in the sand and declare that what has been will no longer be what will continue. That is the essence of transformation. That is the power that shifts entire generations. That is the choice that takes someone from a lifetime of repeating cycles into a future of rewriting destiny. Everything you have been waiting for, everything you have been dreaming of, everything you say you want begins the moment you stand tall and declare this ends with me. When you say those words with certainty, you interrupt years of conditioning. You break patterns that have been passed down through families, through culture, through society. You break the excuses you've told yourself for years. You break the habits that have silently stolen your potential. You break the comfort zone that has kept you small. All of it collapses under the weight of one decision. People think breakthroughs take years, but breakthroughs happen in a moment. They happen in the moment you make a decision so powerful, so final, that there is no going back. The moment you say this ends with me, your identity shifts, your energy shifts, your life shifts. Think about how many people before you lived in cycles that no one dared to break. Generations of people who settled for less, who tolerated suffering, who accepted mediocrity because that was the story they inherited. And then someone came along who said enough. Someone decided the cycle of poverty, the cycle of fear, the cycle of silence, the cycle of limitation ends with me. And because of that one decision, everything changed not only for them, but for everyone who came after. That is the power you hold in your own life. You can be the one who says this ends with me. You can be the one who breaks the cycle and creates a new one of abundance, courage, strength, love, and freedom. The human mind will try to negotiate with you when you reach that moment of decision. It will whisper that you can wait until tomorrow. It will argue that things aren't really that bad. It will tempt you with comfort, with safety, with familiarity. But deep down, you know the truth. Deep down, you know there is a cycle that must end. Deep down, you know you cannot keep carrying the old weight. Deep down, you know that if you don't decide now, you will keep reliving the same story again and again. And the truth is nothing changes until you decide. You can talk about change. You can wish for change. You can plan for change. But until you decide, nothing moves. The decision is the ignition switch. Without it, the engine never starts. When you say this ends with me, you give yourself permission to no longer be ruled by the past. You stop identifying with your limitations. You stop carrying the excuses that have kept you safe but small. You stop blaming circumstances and start claiming power. And something incredible happens. You begin to rise. You rise with new energy. You rise with new clarity. You rise with new strength. Because nothing is more powerful than a human being who has decided. A human being who has burned the boats, who has closed the back door, who has eliminated the option of retreat. That level of commitment bends reality. That level of certainty creates breakthroughs that defy logic. You do not need to have all the answers when you make the decision. You do not need to know every step on the path. You do not need to be fearless or flawless. You only need to decide that the old way ends here. That is the seed. And once that seed is planted, action follows. Momentum builds. Courage grows. Resources appear. Opportunities open. The universe responds to the decision. Life respects the decision. People who were once blind to you suddenly notice you. Energy that once felt stagnant begins to flow. But none of it begins until you say, this ends with me. Ask yourself right now, what cycle have I been carrying that must end? Is it the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck? The cycle of toxic relationships? The cycle of self-sabotage? The cycle of playing small? The cycle of saying yes to everything and losing myself in the process? Whatever it is, it ends when you decide. And the moment you decide, your breakthrough begins. Not tomorrow, not someday, not when conditions are perfect, but right now in the moment of decision. Because the decision is the breakthrough. The moment you cut off the old path, you open the new one. The moment you close the door behind you, the new door in front of you begins to appear. The decision is not always comfortable. In fact, it rarely is. It may require letting go of people who hold you back. It may require walking away from environments that keep you stuck. It may require facing fears you've avoided for years. It may require looking at yourself in the mirror and admitting truths you've buried. But that is the price of freedom. That is the price of transformation. And once you pay it, you realize it was never really a cost. It was an investment, because the return is a life of power, of choice, of authenticity, of greatness. A life where you are no longer dragged by the weight of the past, but pulled forward by the vision of the future. Breakthroughs are not reserved for the special few. They are available to anyone who decides. That includes you. Right now in this moment, you can decide that the cycle ends here. You can decide that your children will not inherit your fears. You can decide that your future will not be limited by your past. You can decide that you will no longer tolerate what steals your energy, your joy, your potential. You can decide that the line is drawn and you will never go back. That one decision changes everything. That one decision is the turning point of your story. That one decision is the moment where you stop being a prisoner of the cycle and start being the author of your life. The world may not notice the moment you decide. It may not look dramatic on the outside, but inside it is seismic. It is the earthquake that shifts the foundation of your life. And soon enough, the results begin to show. Soon enough, the people around you see a different you. Soon enough, your habits, your energy, your results reflect the power of your decision. But it all traces back to that one defining moment when you stood firm and said the words that changed everything. This ends with me. Interrupt your patterns. Stop rehearsing excuses and start demanding results. Every single one of us lives with patterns that shape the quality of our lives. We wake up in the same way. We think the same thoughts. We feel the same emotions. We take the same actions, and we repeat them day after day until they become who we are. But what most people don't realize is that these patterns are not destiny. They are decisions being replayed. And every time you repeat them, you reinforce them. Every time you let them run unconsciously, they grow stronger. If you want to change your life, the first step is to interrupt those patterns, because until you do, you'll keep rehearsing the same excuses and keep living the same results. Excuses are rehearsed patterns. They are stories you've told yourself so many times that they feel like truth. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I don't have the right connections. I don't have the energy. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm not ready. On and on. The list never ends. And every time you repeat those excuses, you etch them deeper into your identity. They stop being just thoughts and start becoming who you are. But excuses are not truth. They are patterns. And like all patterns, they can be broken. The moment you interrupt an excuse with a demand for results, you reclaim your power. You shift from being a victim of circumstance to being a creator of circumstance. Think about the power of interruption. If you're stuck in a loop, the only way to escape is to interrupt it. If a song keeps playing on repeat, you press stop. If a movie keeps restarting, you shut it off. Yet when it comes to our lives, most people never press stop on the patterns that disempower them. They keep letting fear, doubt, procrastination, and excuses play on repeat without ever challenging them. But the moment you interrupt those patterns, you break the rhythm. You shock the system. You wake yourself up. And in that moment, you have a choice to create a new pattern, one that leads to growth, one that leads to strength, one that leads to results. The difference between people who live with excuses and people who live with results is not talent, not luck, not opportunity. It's their relationship with patterns. Excuse-driven people rehearse the same reasons for why they can't. Result-driven people rehearse the actions that prove they can. Excuse-driven people wait for motivation. Result-driven people create momentum. Excuse-driven people give power to their limitations. Result-driven people give power to their possibilities. And the shift between the two begins with one action interrupting the old pattern. Because until you do, the cycle of excuses will keep feeding itself. It will keep you comfortable but small, safe but stuck, alive but not fully living. Interrupting patterns is not always easy because your brain craves familiarity. It wants to conserve energy by doing what it has always done. It rewards you for repeating the familiar by making it feel safe, even if it's destructive. That's why excuses feel natural. That's why procrastination feels justified. That's why fear feels rational. But just because it feels real doesn't mean it is. It's just a pattern. And you have the power to break it by doing something radically different in the moment. Raise your standards. Shift your state. Take action when your mind screams to wait. Push forward when everything in you wants to hold back. That act of interruption is where transformation begins. Stop rehearsing excuses. You've rehearsed them long enough. You know them by heart. You can recite them without even thinking. But every time you rehearse an excuse, you give away your future. You trade your potential for comfort. You trade your power for safety. You trade your results for reasons. It's time to flip the script. Start rehearsing results. Start rehearsing discipline. Start rehearsing courage. Start rehearsing relentless action. Imagine what your life would look like if you rehearsed your best self as much as you've rehearsed your excuses. Imagine the momentum, the breakthroughs, the victories that would follow. Demand results from yourself. That is the standard of greatness. Not hoping for results, not wishing for results, not waiting for results, but demanding them. Demanding results means you no longer accept excuses from yourself. It means you no longer tolerate mediocrity. It means you hold yourself accountable to the life you know you were created to live. It means you stop negotiating with laziness, with fear, with self-doubt. It means you set the bar higher and refuse to lower it no matter what. And when you demand results, something powerful happens. You begin to rise to the level of your demands. Your brain adapts, your body adapts, your habits adapt, because life gives you what you insist upon, not what you casually wish for. You already know the areas where excuses have been running the show. You already know the patterns that need to be interrupted. Maybe it's the pattern of starting strong and quitting early. Maybe it's the pattern of saying you'll do it tomorrow. Maybe it's the pattern of blaming circumstances. Maybe it's the pattern of waiting for permission. Whatever it is, you know it. And if you know it, you can stop it. The moment you feel the excuse rising, stop it cold. Interrupt it. Replace it with action. Replace it with truth. Replace it with the standard of results. Do this once and it feels hard. Do it 10 times and it starts to stick. Do it 100 times and you've created a new pattern, a pattern that serves you, a pattern that empowers you, a pattern that produces the life you want. You cannot create extraordinary results with ordinary patterns. You cannot live a life of excellence with a mind full of excuses. You cannot experience freedom while rehearsing the chains that hold you back. If you want more, you must demand more. If you want different, you must do different. If you want results, you must stop rehearsing the story of why you can't and start rehearsing the reality of why you must. And every time you choose to interrupt a pattern, you strengthen the muscle of discipline, the muscle of courage, the muscle of results. Over time, this becomes who you are, not someone who explains why they didn't, but someone who proves why they did. The future belongs to those who interrupt their patterns and demand results. The future belongs to those who stop being seduced by excuses and start being obsessed with outcomes. The future belongs to those who look themselves in the mirror and refuse to tolerate anything less than their best. And the future begins in the moment you decide to stop rehearsing the old and start rehearsing the new. It begins when you decide that excuses are no longer welcome, that patterns of limitation no longer control you, that from this moment on you live in results. You breathe results, you demand results. That is where your power lives. That is where transformation begins. That is how you take control of your life and break free from everything that has ever held you back. Breaking the cycle doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It creates them. Too many people are waiting for the stars to align before they move. They say they'll take action when they feel ready, when the timing is better, when the money is there, when the opportunities appear, when they're less afraid. But perfect conditions never arrive. There is no perfect time, no perfect environment, no perfect set of circumstances. Waiting for perfect conditions is just another cycle, another pattern, another excuse disguised as patience. The truth is, those who break cycles don't wait for the right conditions. They create them by taking action in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of the fear, in the middle of the uncertainty. Look back at your own life. Every time you grew, every time you transformed, every time you surprised yourself with strength you didn't know you had, it wasn't because everything was lined up neatly. It was because you acted when you weren't ready. It was because you stepped forward when it didn't make sense. It was because you chose to move when everything in you wanted to hold back. That is how cycles are broken. They're not broken when the weather is clear and the road is smooth. They're broken in the storms, in the darkness, in the moments where you feel like you can't take another step, but you take it anyway. Cycles feed on waiting. They survive on hesitation. They thrive when you convince yourself that someday you'll change. But someday is not a day of the week. Someday is the language of people who never break free. The people who break cycles are the ones who understand that conditions are never perfect, but decisions are always possible. You don't need the road to be clear to start walking. You don't need the resources to start building. You don't need the confidence to start showing up. You don't need the guarantee to start believing. You don't need to feel fearless to act with courage. Action creates conditions. Action builds momentum. Action generates opportunity. The cycle ends when you stop waiting and start creating. Perfection is the greatest lie that steals progress. It tricks you into thinking you need everything aligned before you move. But what you really need is to move so things can align. When you act, you force conditions to change. You create momentum where there was none. You open doors that didn't exist before. You attract resources you couldn't see before. You meet people you would never have met sitting still. But none of that happens while you wait. It happens while you move. Progress doesn't come to those who wait. It comes to those who act. Conditions don't become perfect by chance. They become perfect because you decided to move despite imperfection. Think about the cycles that hold people back. The cycle of procrastination, the cycle of fear, the cycle of settling, the cycle of blaming circumstances. All of them have one thing in common. They're fueled by the belief that the conditions aren't right yet. I'll start when I have more money. I'll commit when I feel ready. I'll pursue it when the timing is better. But when you peel back those words, they're just excuses wrapped in the illusion of logic. If you want to break the cycle, you have to stop negotiating with conditions. You have to stop waiting for life to give you permission. You have to create the conditions through your decisions. Breaking the cycle requires courage because the world will never hand you certainty. It will never hand you guarantees. It will never hand you a perfect set of circumstances. That's not how transformation works. Transformation begins in the middle of the mess. Transformation begins when you decide that even if it's not perfect, even if you're scared, even if you don't have everything you need, you'll start anyway. And when you start, the ground begins to shift. Energy moves. Possibilities emerge. The conditions begin to form around your action. That is how leaders are made. That is how cycles are broken. That is how freedom is created. You have to understand that the moment you move, you change the environment. The moment you commit, you bend reality around your decision. The moment you act, you send a signal to your brain, to your body, to the universe itself that you're serious. And everything begins to rearrange in response. People who have resources suddenly notice you. Opportunities that seemed invisible suddenly appear. Ideas you never considered suddenly surface. But none of this comes to the person who waits for perfection. It only comes to the person who acts in imperfection. The difference between those who stay trapped and those who break free is simple. The ones who stay trapped wait for the perfect time. The ones who break free create the time. They decide that now is enough. They decide that who they are is enough. They decide that what they have is enough. And because they decide, they act. And because they act, the cycle shatters. And once the cycle shatters, Momentum takes over. Momentum becomes the new condition. And momentum is far more powerful than perfection. Ask yourself right now, what cycle have you been waiting to break? What change have you been postponing until conditions improve? Have you been waiting for the right partner, the right opportunity, the right amount of money, the right moment to feel ready? That waiting is the very thing keeping you in the cycle. The cycle will never end if you keep feeding it with hesitation. The only way out is through action. Decide now, act now, create now. Don't wait for life to become easy. Don't wait for fear to disappear. Don't wait for the environment to be perfect. Step into the chaos and create order. Step into the uncertainty and create clarity. Step into the fear and create courage. Breaking the cycle is not about conditions outside of you. It's about the condition inside of you. It's about your standards. It's about your commitment. It's about your willingness to act even when it doesn't feel right. Because when you demand more of yourself, when you refuse to wait for permission, when you take ownership of your life, you create the very conditions you thought you needed. You become the condition. You become the environment. You become the force that shapes what happens around you. The people who change the world, the people who redefine what's possible, the people who live lives of freedom and power are not the ones who waited for perfect conditions. They are the ones who created them. They are the ones who stood in the middle of fear and moved anyway. They are the ones who acted when they didn't feel ready. They are the ones who built momentum from nothing. They are the ones who stopped waiting for life to hand them a cycle worth living and created their own. And that same power is in you. That same ability to create condition, to break cycles, to redefine your story lives in your decision, in your action, in your willingness to stop waiting and start building